The voicemail came through while I was at the grocery store, standing in the frozen food aisle, trying to decide between two brands of pizza. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail and finished my shopping. When I got home and checked it, a woman's voice spoke with the kind of professional neutrality that comes from delivering difficult news regularly. This message is for Diane Mercer. This is Patricia Aldridge calling from Willowbrook Extended Care. We're trying to reach you regarding your mother, Helen Mercer. There's been an incident, and we need to discuss her care plan. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. I stood in my kitchen with a bag of groceries still in my hand and played the message twice more. My mother had been dead for 26 years. I'd been 12 when she died. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I remembered the hospital, the smell of disinfectant, the way her hand felt in mine paper, thin and cold. I remembered the cemetery, the rain, my father standing beside me in a suit that didn't fit right anymore. I remembered the headstone we picked out together, simple granite with her name and dates. Helen Patricia Mercer, 1945-1996. I set the groceries on the counter and called the number back. Willowbrook Extended Care, this is Janine speaking. I'm returning a call from Patricia Aldridge. This is Diane Mercer. One moment, please. Hold music, something instrumental and vaguely soothing. I stared out the window at my neighbor's fence, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ms. Mercer? A different voice now, older, more authoritative. This is Patricia Aldridge. Thank you for calling back. There's been a mistake, I said. My mother passed away in 1996. A pause. I see. Can you hold for just a moment? More hold music. Longer this time. I pulled out a chair and sat down. When Patricia came back on the line, her tone had shifted slightly, more careful. Ms. Mercer, I apologize for the confusion. Let me verify some information. Your mother's name is Helen Mercer, correct? Was. Helen Patricia Mercer. She died 26 years ago. And your father? Robert Mercer. He passed away 8 years ago. I see. And do you have any siblings? A half-brother. From my father's first marriage. Why? What's his name? Thomas Brennan. Why are you asking me this? Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Mercer, we have a resident here named Helen Mercer. She was admitted 14 years ago. The contact information we have on file lists you as next of kin, but the phone number we had was disconnected. We only recently obtained your current number through a secondary contact. That's impossible. My mother is buried at Oak Hill Cemetery. I understand this is confusing. Would you be willing to come in and speak with us in person? I think it would be easier to sort this out face to face. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up and forget this conversation ever happened, but something in Patricia's voice, something careful and deliberate, made me agree. When? Would tomorrow work? Say 2 o'clock. Fine. Thank you, Miss Mercer. I'll see you then. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the light change through the window. I'd lived in the same small town my whole life. After my father died, I'd inherited the house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch on the east side. I worked as a bookkeeper for a regional insurance company, the kind of job that was stable but unremarkable. I had a handful of friends, a routine I liked, and a life that felt manageable. My father had been a quiet man, especially after my mother died. He worked as a machinist at a plant 20 miles away and came home tired every night. We didn't talk much about her after the funeral. It was like we'd both agreed silently that it hurt too much to keep her present in our daily lives, so we moved on, or tried to. Thomas, my half-brother, was 15 years older than me and lived 3 states away. We'd never been close. He'd moved out before I was born, and by the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, he and my father barely spoke. I knew there'd been tension, something about money, about Dad's first marriage ending badly, but no one ever explained it to me in detail. After Dad died, Thomas came to the funeral, stayed 2 days, and left. We exchanged emails maybe twice a year after that. Polite, distant. I couldn't imagine why he'd have anything to do with this. That evening, I drove to Oak Hill Cemetery. It was a 20-minute drive through streets I'd known my entire life. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the river, old oak trees lining the paths between sections. I parked near the office and walked to my mother's grave. I'd been here maybe a dozen times since the funeral. Birthdays, anniversaries, the occasional moment when I needed to feel close to her again. The last time had been 2 years ago. The headstone was still there, weathered but intact. Helen Patricia Mercer, 1945–1996, beloved wife and mother. I stood there for a long time, staring at the engraved letters, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Then I walked back to the cemetery office. It was a small brick building near the entrance, and through the window I could see a woman at a desk, typing on a computer. I knocked, and she looked up. "Can I help you? I'm here about a grave. Section C, plot 47. Helen Mercer." She pulled up a database on her computer. "What do you need to know?" "I just want to confirm it's occupied." She clicked through a few screens. "Helen Mercer died March 1996. Yes, that plot is occupied. Burial took place March 23, 1996. Is there any way to verify that?" She looked at me with mild curiosity. "Verify how? I don't know. Records, permits, everything we have is in the system. Burial permit, plot deed, payment records. Is there a problem?" No. I'm just confirming something." She watched me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If you need official documentation, we can provide copies for a small fee." "That's okay. Thank you." I left and sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Willowbrook Extended Care was on the north side of town, a sprawling single-story building surrounded by landscaped gardens. I arrived at 1:55 and sat in the parking lot, watching people come and go. Visitors, staff, a delivery truck unloading supplies. At 2 o'clock I went inside. The lobby was clean and bright, with pale blue walls and watercolor paintings of landscapes. A receptionist behind a desk looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Patricia Aldridge. I have a 2 o'clock appointment." "Your name?" "Diane Mercer." She picked up a phone, spoke quietly, and nodded. "She'll be right out." I sat in one of the chairs by the window and waited. Patricia Aldridge was a woman in her late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She wore business casual and carried a tablet. "Ms. Mercer, thank you for coming. Let's talk in my office." I followed her down a hallway lined with framed photos of residents engaged in activities. Bingo, gardening, holiday parties. Everything looked warm and cheerful, the kind of place that worked hard to feel like home. Patricia's office was small but organized. She closed the door and gestured to a chair. "I appreciate you coming in. I know this situation is unusual." "That's one word for it." She set the tablet on her desk. "Let me explain what we know. 14 years ago, a woman named Helen Mercer was admitted to this facility. She was suffering from advanced Alzheimer's and required full-time care. The admission paperwork listed Thomas Brennan as her legal guardian and you as secondary next of kin." "Thomas?" "My half-brother." "Yes, he handled all the arrangements. Financial, medical, legal. He visited occasionally for the first few years, but his visits became less frequent over time. About 3 years ago, he stopped coming altogether. And no one questioned this. Residents lose contact with family for many reasons, Ms. Mercer. We can't force people to visit. As long as the bills were being paid and her care needs were met, there wasn't cause for concern. So why are you calling me now?" Patricia hesitated. "Because 2 weeks ago Helen had a fall. She fractured her hip and required surgery. We tried to contact Thomas to authorize the procedure, but his number was disconnected. We couldn't locate him. That's when we started digging into the file more carefully and found the secondary contact information. You. I never authorized anyone to list me as next of kin for a facility." "I understand. That's part of why we're having this conversation. You said she has Alzheimer's." "Advanced stage, yes. She doesn't speak anymore. She's nonverbal, largely unresponsive, so she can't tell you who she is." "Nupo." I looked at Patricia for a long moment. "I want to see her." "I thought you might." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No. But I need to." Patricia stood and picked up the tablet. "Follow me." We walked down another hallway, this one quieter, lined with numbered doors. Some were open, revealing rooms with hospital beds, medical equipment, personal items on shelves, photos, flowers. Small touches that try to make sterile spaces feel human. Patricia stopped at room 24. She's in here? She opened the door. The room was small, with a window overlooking the garden. There was a bed, a chair, a dresser with a few framed photos on top. And in the bed, propped up slightly with pillows, was a woman. She was old, much older than my mother would have been. Thin, frail, with white hair and papery skin. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. I stood in the doorway looking at her. "This isn't my mother," I said quietly. Patricia didn't respond. She just stood beside me waiting. I stepped closer. The woman's face was gaunt, hollowed by age and illness. But even accounting for time, even accounting for disease, the features were wrong. My mother had a scar on her chin from a childhood accident. This woman didn't. My mother's ears were slightly asymmetrical. This woman's weren't. "This isn't her," I said again more firmly. Patricia nodded slowly. "Then we need to figure out who she is." We went back to Patricia's office, and I sat down heavily in the chair. "How long has she been nonverbal?" I asked. "At least 10 years, according to the records." So she couldn't have told anyone who she was, even early on, not if she was already in advanced Alzheimer's when she arrived. Why would Thomas do this? Why would he admit someone under my mother's name? Patricia folded her hands on the desk. "I can only speculate. But if I had to guess, I'd say financial reasons. Medicaid fraud, identity theft. These things happen more often than you'd think. He used my mother's identity to get someone else care. Possibly. Or to access benefits. I don't know. But we need to report this to the authorities. What happens to her?" I gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "The woman in that room. We'll continue caring for her while we investigate. But if she's not Helen Mercer, we need to find out who she actually is. She deserves that." I nodded. "What do you need from me?" "A formal statement. Documentation proving your mother's death. Anything you know about Thomas that might help investigators locate him." "I can do that." Patricia picked up a pen. "Let's start now." I spent 2 hours in that office, going through everything I knew. My mother's death certificate, which I'd had to request a copy of from the county clerk's office. The cemetery records. Photos from the funeral. I gave Patricia everything I had about Thomas, his last known address, his email, his phone number. I explained the family history as best I understood it, though there were gaps I couldn't fill. When I finally left Willowbrook, it was almost 5 o'clock. I drove home in silence, my mind circling the same questions. Who was that woman? Why had Thomas done this? And what else had he lied about? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman in room 24, staring at nothing, living under a name that wasn't hers. I thought about my mother, who'd been dead for 26 years, but whose identity had somehow been stolen and used. I thought about Thomas, who I barely knew, but who'd clearly been orchestrating something. At 2 in the morning, I got up and opened my father's old filing cabinet. I'd kept it after he died, mostly out of inertia. It was full of old tax returns, insurance policies, medical records, the accumulated paperwork of a life. I started going through it methodically, looking for anything related to Thomas. Most of it was mundane. But near the back, I found a folder labeled Legal. Inside were copies of documents from my father's first divorce, dated 1970. There was also a letter handwritten, dated 1998, 2 years after my mother died. The letter was from Thomas to my father. "Dad, I know you won't forgive me for what I did, and I'm not asking you to. But I need you to understand that I didn't have a choice. The debts were real, and they were going to destroy me. I did what I had to do to survive. I know you think I stole from you. Maybe I did. But you've never struggled the way I have. You've never had to choose between keeping a roof over your head and keeping your integrity. I'm done trying to justify myself. Just know that I don't expect anything from you anymore. We're even as far as I'm concerned." Thomas, I read the letter 3 times, trying to parse meaning from vague words. Debts. Stole, even. What had Thomas done? The next morning I called Patricia. "I found something. A letter from Thomas to my father. It mentions debts and theft, but it's vague. I don't know what it's referring to." "Can you send me a copy?" "Yes." "Good. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services and the State Medicaid Fraud Unit. They're opening investigations. This letter might help. What about Thomas? Have they found him? Not yet. But they're looking. I scanned the letter and emailed it to Patricia. Then I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my phone, debating. Finally, I opened my email and searched for the last message I'd received from Thomas. It was from 6 months ago, a brief reply to a holiday email I'd sent. Hope you're doing well. Things are busy here. Take care. No details, no warmth, just polite distance. I hit reply and typed carefully. Thomas, I need to talk to you about something urgent. A nursing home contacted me recently regarding someone admitted under Mom's name. I'm trying to sort out what's happening, and I need your help. Please call me. Diane, I sent it and waited. 2 days later, I got a response. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have been contacted by mistake. I can't help you. I stared at the message. It was the first outright lie he'd told me. At least, the first I could prove. I forwarded the email to Patricia. The investigation took months. Adult Protective Services interviewed staff at Willowbrook, reviewed admission records, and traced payment histories. The Medicaid fraud unit subpoenaed financial documents, and slowly, the picture came together. The woman in room 24 was named Lillian Brennan. She was Thomas's mother, my father's first wife. She'd developed Alzheimer's in her early 60s and had been living with Thomas until the disease progressed too far for him to manage alone. But Thomas didn't have the resources to pay for full-time care, and Lillian didn't qualify for Medicaid because she owned property. So Thomas had used my mother's identity to admit Lillian to Willowbrook. My mother's social security number, her Medicare information, her identity. He'd falsified documents, forged signatures, and created a paper trail that made it look like Helen Mercer was still alive. And it had worked for 14 years. The fraud had gone undetected because Thomas had been careful. He'd paid some bills out of pocket, used my mother's benefits for others, and avoided raising red flags. He'd visited just enough to seem like a concerned family member, but not so much that staff would scrutinize him closely. When I learned all this, I felt something strange. Not anger, exactly. Just a deep, heavy sadness. Thomas had been desperate. I understood that. But he'd stolen my mother's identity to do it. He'd erased her death, opted her name and used her memory as a tool. And he'd listed me as next of kin without asking, dragging me into his deception. The authorities eventually located Thomas in Arizona. He was arrested and extradited back to face charges. Medicaid fraud, identity theft, falsifying documents. He pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with restitution owed to the state. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't write a victim impact statement. I just let the system do its work. Lillian, Thomas's mother, the woman who'd lived as Helen Mercer for 14 years, remained at Willowbrook while her case was sorted out. With Thomas convicted, the state took over her care. She qualified for Medicaid under her real name, and Willowbrook continued to care for her. I visited her once more before everything was finalized. I don't know why. Maybe because she was the closest thing to family I had left, even though we'd never met when she was lucid. I sat in the chair beside her bed and looked at her. She stared at nothing, her breathing slow and steady. "I'm sorry?" I said quietly. "I'm sorry this happened to you." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. I left after a few minutes and didn't go back. The state eventually corrected my mother's records, removing the fraudulent activity from her Social Security file. The cemetery confirmed that her grave had never been disturbed. My mother was still there, where she'd been for 26 years. I visited the grave one more time after everything was resolved. I stood there in the quiet, staring at the headstone, and felt something finally settle inside me. She was gone. She'd always been gone. The fraud hadn't changed that. But it had stolen something else, my ability to remember her without complications. Now, every time I thought about her, I'd think about Lillian, about Thomas, about the 14 years of lies. I didn't know how to forgive that. Maybe I never would. But I also understood that Thomas had been trying to survive. That desperation makes people do things they'd never otherwise consider. That the world is rarely as simple as right and wrong. I drove home and made dinner and went back to my quiet, manageable life, and sometimes, late at night, I thought about the woman in room 24, Lillian, not Helen, and hoped she was at peace in whatever fog she lived in now. If you've ever discovered a betrayal so tangled you couldn't even find the beginning of it, you're not alone.